Hello, and a very warm welcome to this insight session on the state of play for the European tourism industry. I'm Rachel Reed, I'm the Director of Insight here at ETOA, and I am joined today by Juan Gómez of ForwardKeys. We're delighted to work with ForwardKeys as our data partner, and it's most timely that we're holding this session on European destinations just ahead of our City Fair event. For those of you who haven't been before, City Fair is a full day of pre-assigned one-on-one meetings between buyers and destinations from all over Europe. And as you can see on the screen at the moment, it's going to be online on the 9th of June. So do please contact my colleague Karen Jensen on the email on the screen, kjensen@etoa.org. If you'd like more information, there's 250 people already registered, so plenty of people to see. So do please contact Karen if you need to register for City Fair. As I say, we've recently begun working much more closely with ForwardKeys, and Juan has very kindly put together a collection of highly pertinent data of how things are looking for European tourism. I'm sure he'll give you a little bit more information in a moment, but he's going to start with global scene setting, and then he's going to move on the focus to Europe and the trends in booking patterns we've seen since the start of the pandemic, look at the impact of Ukraine, and on into future forecasts on how things are looking this summer and beyond. The presentation will be available afterwards, so we'll send it out to you when the webinar's over. And do please send any questions you have for Juan while he's speaking, pop them in the chat and I can put them to Juan afterwards. There'll be time for those. So Juan, please let me hand over to you. We would love to hear your insights.
Share the screen. Well, thank you, Rachel. It is always a great pleasure to join you and share with ETOA members, many of which joining us today already work with us, and industry partners alike, ForwardKeys' latest insights on the global and European travel ecosystem. With countries now open across Europe and a few restrictions in place and the critical summer season fast approaching, there are, of course, a lot of questions regarding the outlook for travel in the next few months. Which destinations are set to benefit from the reactivation of international travel, or which markets will be the most active this year, as well as what trends will continue with us now that the dust seems to be settling. Also, with the situation in Ukraine not improving, how is the conflict affecting booking behaviors? I will try to answer these questions, but of course, everyone is very welcome as you were inviting them to type their questions in the chat box as I speak, to which we will attend later. Before I start, just a few words about the kind of data we use and what we do, as I am aware that some of you are not familiar with ForwardKeys or the data that we use. ForwardKeys is a travel analytics company specialized in air travel. On the supply side, we know when and where airlines intend to fly and how many seats they schedule. On the demand side, on the other hand, we monitor searches performed before a trip, the bookings made and tickets issued. All of these in near real time. In today's presentation, as you were also introducing, I will first look at the big picture via a global overview of international travel in 2022, then inspect a few interesting takeouts regarding what is the new normal and how it looks like in the post-pandemic world for Europe, to then finish with a closer look to the travel recovery in the region, especially for the summer season. First, let's see what the data tell us about international travel so far in 2022. At the beginning of the year, international travel was still hampered by the spread of the new COVID variant, Omicron, and the start of the war in Europe. Total inbound travel was down 59% in Q1 when compared to the same period in 2019. While this stagnating performance in APAC was largely influenced by the harsh travel restrictions in place, the Americas and Africa and Middle East performed better than the world average. Travel to the Americas, to put an example, was only 39% pre-COVID levels, notably better than Europe and the APAC region. Looking further into Q2, which we are now in the middle of, we expect recovery to be stronger with the Americas still leading the way, close to pre-pandemic levels, and Europe being the global region showing the strongest recovery, 17 percentage points better off than during the first quarter of the year. After the initial concerns of the war in Ukraine, the further ease of restrictions and the return of more capacity, we see that Europe is well on their way to achieve a great summer season, so well on their path to recovery. There are still a lot of last-minute bookings worldwide, so these numbers will probably look even better, especially for APAC, where countries are starting to reopen only recently, which could also mean the return of some of the much-awaited long-haul travelers into Europe, because it's not they reopening as destinations, but also as source markets. One of our main learnings in the past 2 years is that if people can travel, they will. That is perfectly depicted in this image, where you can see the travel restrictions applied in every country worldwide, from completely closed to almost completely open. And what we can clearly see is that when restrictions disappear, bookings go up. It is simple as that. Taking a look at the supply side and looking at what airlines are up to, as I was saying, things look much brighter this year. As with every business, ever-changing travel restrictions undermine airlines' confidence. But the good news is that 2022, in the light blue line on this chart, sees schedules being more consistent and stable than in the past 2 years, just as travel restrictions. Global international capacity has been up significantly in Q1, and more seats are scheduled during airline summer season from late March to October. We're not back to 2019 levels yet in the dark blue, but we're slowly getting there. Our data suggests that current travel patterns are different than what we were used to in pre-pandemic, as all of you know. As some countries have reopened only recently in other parts of the world, we still see that the share of longer stays has increased versus 2019 levels due to VFR passengers. Long stays of more than 2 weeks were only 41% behind 2019 levels in Q1, while all other lengths of stay segmentations were lagging more than 50%. The total market share of longer stays, as you can see, continues also to be higher than shorter stays. Additionally, social distancing has been emphasized during the pandemic. Travel in bigger groups almost faded away, and it still accounts for only 9% share, being 77% behind pre-pandemic levels. This has also had an impact on the traveler's choice of destination, what I was saying about social distancing, and travelers have consistently favored, as we will see later, sun and sea as well as nature destinations over cities and crowded places. And this is something that will still affect travel this summer. As the situation was and still is to some extent very volatile, airlines have offered, as I was saying, more flexibility on bookings, driving the trend of booking directly with them instead of travel agencies. Direct airline bookings were only 41% behind 2019 levels in the first quarter, while bookings with online travel agencies were 58% behind. And all other travel agencies types were 70% behind 2019 levels. You can also see the big shift in market shares, with direct bookings with airlines accounting for 14 percentage points more than what they did in 2019 globally. Looking at the reason or motive for travel, as stated previously, VFRs are the ones driving recovery in many places around the world, being still the most resilient type of travelers. On the other hand, group and business, as I was saying, still have a long way to recover, as they are now 77 and 67% behind pre-pandemic levels, but they are showing great improvement. As I say, while leisure travel is recovering at faster pace, business travel is also catching up. Looking at this evolution of business travel, for example, in orange, and leisure travel in blue, we can see that business travel was more heavily affected by the Omicron wave. This said, bookings for future travel in the dotted line on the chart indicate that business travel is bouncing back and reaching around half of 2019 levels. In the meantime, leisure is expected to reach globally as high as 60% of 2019 levels this summer. Let's now let me focus on Europe and examine some of these trends in more depth. But first, let me take a look at the impact of the war in Ukraine. The travel industry has been faced with two major events in the last 6 months. First, the Omicron outbreak in late November, which caused bookings to drop immediately from 53% of 2019 levels in the beginning of November to 33% in the first week of December. However, as the new variant wasn't as severe as expected, many destinations continue their plans to open up again, and tickets pick up relatively fast, reaching 61% of 2019 levels in the first week of February. Just as we were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, the travel sector has yet again a major crisis to handle with the war in Ukraine and its consequences. Looking at the impact globally, it was not that severe, as international bookings moved only 2-3 percentage points down from one week to another. However, Europe was impacted more strongly. As expected, tickets to Central and Eastern Europe, which is center of conflict, went down and haven't picked up yet. The rest of Europe was affected, as well, as tickets went from very strong recovery of 71% of 2019 levels in the week of 20th of February to 65% in the week of 27th of February, just after the war started. However, as it seemed that the conflict will not expand, the travel confidence rose again, and tickets to the rest of Europe reached again 82% in the end of April. Talking about the general impact of the conflict on the travel, major Western European destinations, even though they faced short-term drop in bookings right after the war started, 1 month later, they are all either approximately same level of bookings as in previous month, or even surpassing those levels. However, destinations closer to the conflict are suffering more, with Belarus and Moldova having more than 50% drop in tickets. Baltic countries, as well as Hungary and Bulgaria, are facing a moderate impact of 10 to 30% less bookings in these 4 weeks after the start of the war compared to the 4 weeks before. Long term, we don't expect that the war will have a big impact, especially on summer season for Western Europe, but the aforementioned destinations need to take action if they don't want to miss out on the overall recovery we're witnessing for the rest of Europe. And a close monitoring of the evolution of the market is definitely needed. Looking at destinations most booked by Russians by traveling between May and August 2022, Turkey, Greece, the UAE, Kyrgyzstan, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Maldives, Croatia, Armenia, Egypt, etc. These are the top 20 destinations. They differ a lot in comparison to pre-pandemic. We now see a majority of those European destinations in that list of 2019 being off this year's list. And this is, of course, due to the change in travel preference caused by constantly changing travel restrictions on one side, but definitely the sanctions on Russia from EU and the US having a big impact. Top destinations such as Turkey, Greece, and the UAE all seeing a decrease in the share of Russian travelers. And for Spain and Italy, Russian travelers merely account now for less than 0.3%, while in 2019 the shares were about 3-4%. On the other hand, we see that some Asian and Middle East destinations are climbing to the top positions, while in pre-pandemic they weren't there. The UAE ranks now the 3rd, and Maldives is the 7th position. The share of Russian travelers out of the international travelers to Maldives increased by 2% when compared to 2019. For European destinations like Montenegro, their dependence on Russian arrivals is tricky. Look at Montenegro or Bulgaria. Data can help them, obviously, to monitor which markets are most reactivated so that they can turn their eyes into alternative markets to make up for the loss of Russian travelers. So something to definitely look for. To finish off looking at the impact of the war, I'm glad to confirm that obviously recovery is still on their way for key travel periods and for the leisure segment in particular. Intra-European travel is the key for many European destinations, and it's reassuring to see that 1 month after the invasion, the summer outlook has improved consistently, and tickets confirmed for intra-European arrivals this summer are currently only 18% behind compared to pre-pandemic. The resilience of intra-European travel is a really good piece of news for the sector, so of course keep this in mind. In general, European destinations are more dependent on intra-regional travel, as I say, but also on travel from North America. We've observed an increase in shares, in particular for intra-regional, as I was saying, but also from North America due to the ease in restrictions adopted now by European countries and the thirst of US travelers. Many Caribbean destinations, as we have been communicating in the past few months, have benefited from this renewed interest in travel from North America. And Europe is no exception. Greece saw a record number of US visitors last summer and is set to surpass those numbers this year with an extraordinary mix of new routes, a strengthened air capacity, and record number in bookings. This is in part helping to improve the overall arrival numbers, now expected to be near pre-pandemic for Greece. And there's no reason why other countries in Europe, say in the Adriatic or Western Mediterranean, couldn't share part of this cake. Leisure travel will, of course, dominate this summer in Europe. European destinations, the majority of visitors are planning to stay between 4 and 13 nights. And on the other hand, families and couples are close in the total share of arrivals, while singles and groups are much lower. In terms of distribution channels, as I was mentioning before, airline direct has increased its share since pre-pandemic to a 63% of total bookings now confirmed for arrivals between June and September to Europe. So to wrap up my presentation, let's now examine what does the data say about the upcoming summer season and what can we expect. Will finally numbers resemble those of a normal pre-pandemic summer? Well, yes and no. For many destinations, domestic markets will continue to be the safe boat that will save the season. For others, numbers will get very close to pre-pandemic levels, helped by strong markets that are set to recover or even surpass pre-pandemic levels. Let me start first by looking at the most reactivated source markets into Europe. As you can see, aside from Israel, the USA and Canada, all other top source nationalities most recovered for this summer are intra-European. Interesting to see the UK just at pre-pandemic levels when looking at tickets already confirmed from departures to Europe between June and September versus the same moment in 2019. Tickets for traveling from the UK to Turkey, for example, are currently around 90% above pre-pandemic levels, 53% growth for Greece, 4% up for Croatia, and 3% up for Spain. All these and other destinations are set to receive way more British tourists than in 2019, as long-haul travel remains to be expensive and is not perceived yet as 100% safe, not only by the UK market, but other source markets. All top destinations for British travelers show a renewed interest in sun and sea destinations, as I was mentioning earlier, while cities, urban breaks are still lagging behind. Still in the red, but not far off 2019 levels, is the US, I was mentioning earlier, an important market to look for, with an overall decline in tickets to Europe for the summer season of around 18%. But like with the UK, some destinations are set to receive record number of US visitors this summer. Turkey, 61% more US visitors, Portugal, 35% more, Greece, 21% more. I think you start picturing which destinations will be the most recovered this summer. Considering how late travelers still book their holidays, these numbers could still improve significantly for all destinations and source markets. Stay tuned to any updates from us on our social media channels because we do post updates on these quite regularly. So as well as summer outlooks that we will be soon publishing. The US, as I say, is definitely a key market to look at. Bookings from the US had very strongly reactivated prior to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and travel restrictions had been previously lifted. This dropped from 86% to 80% of 2019 levels in the week the war started. But since then, as I was mentioning, it's come back to pre-war levels, showing that there's still a strong demand on these strategic and profitable routes. New weekly tickets for future travel to Europe from the US are about to reach pre-pandemic now, as you can see in the graph, while capacity is still lagging behind. So there's definitely room for growth there, and destinations should talk to airlines and, of course, entice that capacity to come to their destinations. Before jumping to the most recent outlook for the summer season, looking at the destinations, let me take a look back at arrivals between January and April. So year to date, I want to look at the comparison, comparing year to date figures to what is already booked for the summer, so you get a better look of the long way we've come. Turkey, Portugal, Norway, Greece, and Spain have been the top performing destinations in Europe so far this year. The latter, Spain, almost recovered to pre-pandemic arrival levels during Easter, welcoming record number of UK visitors, not only to island destinations such as the Balearics or the Canaries, but also second-tier upcoming cities in mainland, especially coastal areas in Spain. So here's the updated list of most resilient destinations ahead of the summer season, where you can see the extraordinary improvement between the year-to-date international arrivals and what is already booked for the summer compared to the same moment in 2019. Of course, taking into consideration that we're still on the way to the summer season, more bookings can come. People are still booking last minute, so these figures could improve. Greece, Turkey, Portugal, Norway, and Spain continue at the top 5. For Greece, most resilient markets will include the Netherlands, currently up by 70% on 2019 levels, Denmark up by 69%, the UK, as previously mentioned, up by 53% on tickets to Greece, and Norway and Sweden up by 40% respectively. Looking at Spain, top 5th most resilient country, we see extraordinary increases from the Nordics, with Sweden up by 80% on pre-pandemic levels, Denmark up by 60%, and Norway up by 32%. I wanted to finish this presentation with this map showing the previous figures. I know I haven't covered all markets, we don't have time for that. And I already warned you, I don't know all the figures by heart, but would love to assist you after this webinar if you reach out to me via email or LinkedIn and look at your destination or market of interest. To conclude, here are some key takeaways. First, international travel to Europe continues accelerating and destinations should prepare for a close to pre-pandemic summer. But second, recovery will be uneven, so expect growth in some markets while others lag behind. Third, expect the unexpected. First Omicron, then the war, and now, of course, high inflation that is likely to affect travelers' spending power. Fourth and last, data is key for destinations and businesses alike to make informed decisions and guide you through this recovery phase. Last but not least, although we'll cover some of your questions now, please do not hesitate to reach out separately, as I was saying, via LinkedIn or email to ask me about your destination or source market of interest. You can also ask me about Destination Gateway, our DMO data solution, which shows travel intent via flight searches, demand via issued tickets, and connectivity. All of these at near real time. We offer exclusively to ETOA members a special rate plus the option to try this tool via a free trial. Just reach out and let's see how we can help you.
Thank you, Juan. Really lots of interesting food for thought there. Thank you so much for taking the time to put that together, especially for this webinar with our members and partners. We really appreciate that. As Juan mentioned, do please send your questions in via the chat facility. You can send those, I can read those here and then put those to Juan. Just while people are thinking, Juan, I thought it was really encouraging with your number one takeaway that things are improving. I think, we always know that we work in an extremely resilient industry, and it's obviously been tested to the absolute limits with this situation. And I think it's fantastically encouraging that we're seeing, finally a bounce back to the pre-pandemic levels. And I think one thing that I always think is very interesting is obviously you're focusing on the actual bookings data, what's happening in real time and in the future. And obviously the other strand is the sentiment studies. We see a lot of sentiment studies that have over the past 2 years through the whole pandemic been saying, yes, we really want to get back to traveling, we really will. And it's fantastic to see that people actually are, I think that's a really good takeaway. And actually what we saw in those sentiment studies, even fairly early on, was that it was the actual restrictions that was stopping people traveling rather than the fear of catching COVID after the initial phases, and particularly with the implementation of vaccines. And I think that your data was really highlighted that fact that it is the actual physical restrictions that put people off. Would you say so?
Definitely. I think, yeah, when you mentioned the sentiment numbers that we were seeing, of course, we don't work with sentiment numbers. We work on let's say factual booking information and searches that the people make, the travelers make. And what we were missing in this equation, as you were just saying, was the fact that people were finding it still difficult to travel, is the hassle of having to go online, look in government websites of other countries, what are the specific restrictions to come into that destination, which again, they were ever changing at last minute. How many PCRs do I need to take? I mean, people are not that bothered about having to take a PCR. It's just the problem of having to take one to go, another one to come back, and where will I be able to get a PCR done in the destination? It's just, it was too many questions, right? So definitely the restrictions were the biggest issue for travelers when deciding to make a trip elsewhere. And that's why we saw, for example, in the UK, where you're based, how the domestic market grew immensely, and we saw how Brits were going to the fantastic places, on the other hand, that the UK has to offer, but then we're very hesitant on traveling abroad and maybe, you know, risking being stranded, even if it was in Portugal, which is close by anyway, but it's not, we're not talking about the Caribbean, but even to European destinations, right? So now that the restrictions are easing, as I was showing at the beginning of the presentation with that colorful graph, we're seeing how, as the restrictions ease, people start booking again. Now it's just a matter of thinking whether this is going to hold up. We are confident that it will hold. It's not just a matter of you know, the release of all this pent-up demand, of this frustrated demand. We believe that there is a strong thirst in travel, and that this will continue after the summer if the conditions are right. Of course, as I was mentioning on my third takeaway, we have to take into considerations as well things like inflation, which is affecting now all markets in Europe, which will definitely have an impact in consumer spending power. And it's something that destinations will have, and businesses will have to bear in mind. Travelers will be mindful of the budget, and will be more sensible on the spending. I see questions coming now.
Yes, they are. And actually, one that I that's caught my eye as well has come in from Ron. It was around the slide on group travel. Obviously, we have many ETOA members are heavily invested in group travel, and you had a slide there about it falling off in terms of flight bookings currently, obviously. And I think one thing to say just before we get to Ron's question was, clearly group travel has the longest lead time. So in terms of flight bookings, you would expect to have a later recovery for when that's actually booked. So I guess if we look in 6 or 12 months ahead, we should have more data for the group.
Also responding to Ron's question, I mean, we consider in this presentation, I consider group any group of 6 or more people, but of course we can break that into smaller groups, larger groups, so our data can show that as well. The other thing to take into consideration is the importance in the group market of long haul market. So for example, we can think of the Chinese tourists, which are not back and are not expected to be back for a while now. We recently published a study, a blog that you can check on our website on a possible return of Chinese, because Chinese travelers have kept on traveling within China during the pandemic when they've been allowed, and we've seen big changes and you know, changes in preferences. So for example, with the celebration of the Winter Olympics, we saw an interest in winter sports destinations in China, which was very interesting, and how they are shifting into also like looking for more like experiences and you know, new things. So all of that is definitely something that could be translated when that long haul group travel comes back to Europe. So definitely something to look at.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And we've got a couple of questions here, which put you on the spot, and it may not be possible to answer immediately, but interesting because it's about Italy, obviously one of the big destinations and origin markets in Europe. Anna Paola was just saying, Italy didn't feature on the top 10 resilient destinations. Do you have any inkling either as to why or roughly where it was sitting?
Yeah, it's around the 30-something% decline for the summer season, and yet again the main reason for this being the travel restrictions. Only last week they updated the travel restrictions, which until now required PCR, also with the vaccination, the 3rd dose, or recovery certificate, and also businesses. I mean, the mask was still enforced, the COVID certificate as well. So there is a big difference with other destinations. So for example, Spain, that has been one of the most restrictive countries as well across Europe, but Italy was even more, or at least slower at lifting all these restrictions. So that's definitely the main reason for this.
Thank you. And then again, just if you happen to know, Claire was following on from that saying, did you know where the UK came on that? If you've got a sort of longer list beneath that one, are you able to share that?
No. I don't have it at hand now, but it's definitely something that I could share if they get in touch with me. I can look at those figures and also look at the specific markets, which of course I looked at markets into Europe as an overall, but of course, as I was mentioning, there are huge differences. For example, for Greece, we see how some source markets are growing immensely in comparison with 2019, whilst for others are still lagging behind pre-pandemic numbers.
Yes, and actually thinking about source markets, particularly the US, as you mentioned, a really important one for Europe, and we're seeing fantastic recovery. Question from Julia about that. Do you have any data on the booking windows for North America? Because obviously we know it's shrunk, which is very atypical of the North American market to Europe. Are we still seeing that, and do we think that might be a feature of the landscape going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally speaking, booking windows are much shorter. And I think that, of course, reflects the instability of the market and the hesitancy of travelers to make long-term plans that can be slashed by, the Prime Minister of whatever and or the Health Secretary. So, of course, I think it's something to keep in mind. It will stay with us for a while. And that requires planning, it requires adapting to this new reality, and of course working to fight this. At the end of the day, it's about perception, and if you're perceived as a destination that is safe, and not only safe, but that has a clear determination to be open or to remain open for travelers, then the market travelers will perceive this and will definitely book longer in advance to get to your destination.
Indeed. Just to reassure people, because there are a couple of questions about Juan's slides, we definitely will be sharing it afterwards, so it will be made available. Don't worry, we will send that as soon as we possibly can. So yes is the answer to those questions around the actual content of the presentation. A question here that I think is a very interesting point is this idea of incentivizing people to come to your destination over a different one, especially if it's intra-European, you've got an enormous amount of choice. I know this obviously isn't flight bookings, but there's a question here around whether there's any information around which countries are being the most proactive on attractive incentives or even subsidies to event organisers to get those people back in. Is that something you have anything on, Juan?
I don't have anything specific. I mean, of course, we look at corporate and business travel, and it's something that we are looking and monitoring very closely. As I was saying, it got affected more than leisure travel at the outbreak of Omicron. We're seeing now that it's recovering at a similar pace than leisure, so that is encouraging. Of course, we're coming into the summer season, which is, of course, not the prominent time for this type of travel, but it's something that could potentially come back really strongly for the autumn. So again, we don't have a specific numbers on what you are mentioning, but we do track the evolution of business travel, business travelers and corporate, as well as group, which in some cases could fall into that category as well. And we are seeing good or decent recovery rates.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually thinking about different kinds of markets, just had a question come in from Jason about luxury travel. Are we seeing people spending more than they would before, for experience they haven't had a long time, or they've missed out, or time's running out for them to have it? And actually, if I could add two questions into that, because there was sort of the other side of the coin was a question from Christina about, are some markets actually affected adversely by the rising costs of living that we're seeing? So I guess sort of two sides. Are there any markets that are spending more for the luxury experience, and are there some that are hampered by inflation and cost of livings?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the second question. I think at the moment it's very difficult to track whether there is any impact on this sudden increase in the cost of living, because yeah, I mean, we've been suffering from high inflation rates for quite a few months now, but it has all been, you know, accelerated by the conflict in Ukraine, and especially with fuel price, energy prices going up the ceiling. So it's difficult to see a clear pattern right now. But going to the first question, we do see, and I didn't include anything here, but again, we do have the data. Clearly, across the world, is not specific to any destinations. We are seeing a stronger rebound of premium cabin class travel. And I think this has two reasons, or two possible explanations. On the one hand, there is more disposable income in travelers' households. People have been waiting to get away on holidays, so definitely they are more willing to spend more money than they did before the pandemic. After, as I say, 2 years of barely no travel. So that's something to bear in mind. And second, people are looking for more exclusivity, and as well space, just physical space. So even though we were saying, and I do believe that people are not so scared of the virus anymore, now we are vaccinated, and that we see that vaccines work, and that these further new variants haven't had such a big impact. People do still prefer to be in a premium economy or business cabin than economy. So that's something to bear in mind, and our figures do confirm this. And it's not something that is only relatable to one destination or one particular source market. Every market and pretty much every destination in the world is seeing a very similar effect, which is higher or bigger resilience of premium cabin class travel versus economy.
Thank you. And I think we've got time for one last question, which is kind of following on from the questions about the sort of shortened booking windows, and obviously pent-up demand, people not having been able to travel and now seeing a bounce back. There was a question here from Julia about whether we might therefore see an extension to the traditional summer season into perhaps September. I don't know how far ahead you've been able to look for bookings, but whether that's something we might see either as a feature this year or perhaps as a permanent change in bookings with shorter windows now.
Yeah, I think we are to some extent, we are seeing in some specific markets and destinations a slight recovery, or let's say window bookings increasing a little bit, but it's early to tell. I think, as I said, I mean, we are expecting world travel, international travel, to recover fully by 2026. So it's still a long way. That's our latest forecast. Of course, as I was saying, you see Greece or you see Turkey and you see arrivals from the UK, etc., and they are set to exceed by far pre-pandemic levels. So it's a matter of, as I was saying, very uneven recovery, and we will see that uneven recovery. So for the booking windows, I think it will be a matter of the same. We will see how some markets become more confident in travel and things get more normalized. But I think some of these trends are with us to stay. And it's, as I say, a thing of, you know, keep an eye on this and see how things change.
Thank you. I think we've covered most of the general questions. As Juan has actually typed into the chat for everybody, he's happy to speak via email or LinkedIn. There was some slightly more specific questions in there that people had on specific markets. I can see you've put your email address there into the chat as well. So we will wrap up with the questions for Juan. Thank you so much for that. There was a question actually in the chat that said, was ForwardKeys the only place that I can find this data? And I would say certainly in terms of, you know, your airline bookings and actual data, that's where ForwardKeys comes in. And
yes,
just
we currently work with over 100 destinations across the world, and our data is I mean, what can I say, right? But it's unparalleled because we have both direct and indirect bookings, as I was saying, almost real-time data. We also offer flight searches. We have the capacity as well. We have our own models as well that work into those into the data. And what is most important as well, because I mean, we have to be conscious that many destinations or businesses do not have the resources to, dig into the data by themselves, to, crunch all this data, cook it and make it readable for their decision makers within their organization. And that's something that we've been working really hard during the pandemic, and the result of that is our newest tool for DMOs, which is Destination Gateway, which allows you to check, simple metrics with a few clicks and give you the right metrics for you to make informed decisions.
Indeed, and just to add to that as well, we do have the ETOA Insight Hub, so we put things and studies from ForwardKeys on there, and many other places as well. So UNWTO's consumer surveys, the travel barometers, WTTC and our colleagues at the European Travel Commission, etc. So if you are looking for insights, you can look on etoa.org/insight, and it's all broken up by category as well. So if you want more charts, do go and have a look at them. We will put obviously the ForwardKeys one on there as well. So just before I wrap up and thank everybody, to remind you that obviously we're holding this webinar on destinations a few weeks ahead of our workshop on destinations, that's City Fair. So do please register for that. It's online on the 9th of June, as I mentioned. You can contact Karen Jensen, kjensen@etoa.org, should you wish to register for that. There we are, a final reminder. We very much hope to see everybody there. As I say, we're 250 people already. Do please join us then. So it remains for me to thank Juan for your time and insights today, and to thank you all for attending the session. And we very much hope to see you again at the next one. Thank you.